Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Brent Venables, the Oklahoma Sooners, continuing to work through spring practice, and want to do a little bit of a spring practice check-in and talk about some players that are really starting to separate themselves heading into the 2024 year. But my biggest takeaway from this Oklahoma team after reading the spring practice notes, diving into this depth chart, is this is the deepest team that we've seen Brent Venables have since he has arrived in Norman. You're starting to see the fruits of all that recruiting kind of pay off in terms of how this depth chart is constructed heading into 2024. If you want to start at a lot of positions across this Oklahoma team, you have to be great. You have to earn it in spring practice, fall camp. And I think that's exactly what you want to see if you're an Oklahoma fan heading into 2024. Extremely excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and a massive shout out to the Oklahoma fans, whether we're talking the recruiting trail, doing film deep dives. The amount of support y'all continue to show to the boys truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and would love to hear some names that are kind of popping out for you as well. Brent Venables giving us a ton of access to this program during spring practice. I really do appreciate it. This is a team that I love talking about, and so getting all those spring practice clips, it's exciting for me. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to talk about the most important position on the football field, and that is Jackson Arnold. And we kind of all know this, but you watch those spring practice clips, the way the ball comes out of Jackson Arnold's hands, it's just a little bit different than Dillon Gabriel last year. And I'll kind of say this, and I mean it with all due respect to Dillon Gabriel. There's a reason that Dillon Gabriel is back for another year of college football. And there's a reason Oklahoma wanted to give the reins of this offense to Jackson Arnold. His ceiling is going to be so high in this Oklahoma offense over the next couple of years. There's just not many quarterbacks across the country that can rip it and spin it like Jackson Arnold. He just looks different going through those drills during spring practice. And I think Oklahoma fans have a ton to be excited about in terms of the development and ceiling that he brings to this offense. But even more exciting is the pass catchers that Jackson Arnold is going to have at his disposal. And I want to start with the transfer from Purdue, Deion Burks. We just did a film deep dive on Deion Burks last week. There are so many different ways that not only you can get Deion Burks involved in this offense, but there are so many different ways that he can hurt opposing defenses. Deion Burks is a guy that can work as a slot, can work as a boundary guy, line up in the backfield at times for Purdue. A ton of different ways that you can manufacture him touches. But what's most special is Deion Burks is not only one of the premier playmakers in college football with the football in his hands, but he's a guy that can just separate like the best of them. And you're talking about replacing a guy like Drake Stoops. I think Deion Burks might be that guy. And I kind of made the prediction that Nick Anderson was going to be the leading pass catcher for this Oklahoma team heading into 2024. This is not a knock on Nick Anderson. I think he's going to provide a ton of value to this Oklahoma team. But I would like to formally change my prediction. And I'm going to go with Deion Burks. This is a guy that I think is going to get the football in so many different ways. You're hearing a lot of buzz about this kid coming out of spring practice. Massive addition to what I already think is a loaded wide receiver room. Now, another really interesting development for this Oklahoma offense comes at that tight end position that just didn't think he got enough juice from in 2023. Jake Roberts coming in. He's a guy that I think gives you that high ceiling, a very reliable tight end that's played a lot of football at the Power 5 level. The one I want to talk about is Bauer Sharp. And you read the spring practice notes, and even when this kid came into Oklahoma from the FCS level, we talked about just the raw athleticism that Bauer Sharp had. This was a guy that was getting reps as a quarterback, wildcat quarterback during his football career, because this is a guy that you just want the football in his hands. He's a premier athlete that, probably still needs some development as a tight end, but you're talking about a super high upside tight end in Bauer Sharp. He's looking the part during spring practice. We all know Jackson Arnold wants to rip it over the middle of the field. If Bauer Sharp can emerge as that tight end that can dominate those seams, that's going to be massive for this Oklahoma offense and really open it up for some of those boundary wide receivers as well. Bauer Sharp stepping up, sounding like he's going to be a dude, is very exciting for Oklahoma. Running back situation, not many question marks we have about that unit. I want to talk about the offensive line, talk about some guys that have been standing out up front. If there was one question that you have for this Oklahoma team from a depth chart standpoint. I started this off saying, I think this Oklahoma team is extremely deep. I'd say they're deep on the offensive line, but you still have some question marks about what that starting five is going to look like. I want to start off with Big Heath. This is a guy that sounds like he is making some strides and could be a factor for Oklahoma on the offensive line. Many of you guys know how I feel about Eugene Brooks. I think come fall camp, you're going to be talking about Eugene Brooks really making a push for one of those starting spots on the inside. But how this offensive line is constructed with the amount of young talent that you have, right? Guys like Heath, guys like Eugene Brooks, but then the veteran talent that you have as well, whether you added it through the transfer portal or have guys returning. I'm interested to see how this offensive line shakes out, but I think Oklahoma through the transfer portal did a really nice job developing a relatively high floor in terms of what this Oklahoma offensive line can be. And now I think the question is, how good will it be in 2024? But I think you feel good about it as opposed to 2 months ago when there were a lot of question marks on that offensive line. Moving to the defensive side of the football, and this is where I think this unit, it's so loaded. The amount of competition, this is kind of the epitome of if you want to play for Oklahoma on the defensive side of the football, you are going to have to earn it. You have some veteran guys on that defensive line, but you also have some dogs coming in from that recruiting class. David Stone, Jaden Jackson. The guy I want to talk about was Jaden Jackson. And throughout that whole 2024 recruiting cycle, we kind of continued to bang the table for Jaden Jackson just being undervalued by a lot of recruiting services. And we're starting to hear Jaden Jackson be a guy that he's probably going to play a lot year one. We obviously know what David Stone brings from just the raw talent that you have, but it sounds like Jaden Jackson is going to be a factor on that defensive line. And you start looking at, how deep this defensive line is, whether you're looking at the inside, whether you're looking at that edge position, there are probably 12 to 15 guys that Oklahoma probably feels pretty comfortable with being trotting out there. And that's what you want, especially when you talk about the pace that Oklahoma wants to play on offense. You want to keep your defense fresh, right? Part of the downfall, I guess you'd say, about playing with the pace that Oklahoma has is it does kind of put a wear and tear on your defense, specifically on that defensive line. With Oklahoma wanting to play with pace, it is important that Oklahoma has that adequate depth on the defensive line. David Stone, Jaden Jackson, it sounds like are going to be guys that add to that depth on that defensive line. I think this can be an extremely disruptive unit for Oklahoma heading into 2024. Next one I want to talk about here is at that linebacker room where you're seeing a guy like Deshaun McCullough kick down to that will linebacker spot. And there's a ton of competition in that linebacker room. And I kind of get why they want Deshaun McCullough maybe working more close to the line of scrimmage, closer to the ball, because when you go back to him at Indiana, this was a premier pass rusher. You kind of want to get him involved and be by the football and let him impact the game the best way that he can. I think he looked, he was solid at the cheetah position, but I think as we get this advertisement out of the way here, I think you felt really good about where your cheetah position is for Oklahoma right now. There are a ton of names that can really step up, but more importantly, you have a really unique talent with Deshaun McCullough, and I think that will linebacker spot is probably just going to be a better fit from him in terms of rushing the passer, being closer to the line of scrimmage, being a factor in the run game, but also having that athleticism to carry tight ends up the seam and kind of work with some of those slot and tight end wide receivers as well. I thought one thing that was relatively disappointing last year was the coverage that you got from linebackers. Not a great feel for dropping back in zone coverage. Didn't really seem that disruptive in terms of getting in passing lanes. I think a guy like Deshaun McCullough could certainly change that narrative. Then you look to the back end, and there are a bunch of guys stepping up, and that is one of my more intriguing aspects for Oklahoma is a loaded defensive back room, specifically at that cheetah and safety spot. And you have a guy in Zach Alley coming in who wants to get aggressive with his safeties. I've said it time and time again, Billy Bowman Jr., Peyton Bowen, I think one of the more elite safety duos that you'll see in the country. And then you pair him up with a defensive coordinator in Zach Alley, who I think is going to use those guys in a very aggressive manner. I'm extremely excited about that. And then you look at the cornerback spot. I want to shout out Des Malone, a guy that we talked about coming from San Diego State, kind of a veteran presence in that Oklahoma cornerback room. He's got the length. He played really good for San Diego State the last 2 years. Sounds like he could be another guy that is pushing for playing time. And you start looking at this Oklahoma depth chart and say, there's a ton of competition at almost every single spot, and that's only going to raise the tide of this team. You look at programs like Georgia, and what made them so special for the last couple of years is the competition in practice to just get on the field during the fall was at an all-time high. And I think that's why you saw such elite teams from Georgia. You look at this Oklahoma team and say, from a depth and competition standpoint, it is so healthy. And you kind of feel good that whoever wins these position battles and kind of wins those starting opportunities, they're going to be damn good football players for the Oklahoma Sooners in 2024. Really excited about this. Brent Venables, again, giving us a ton of access to what's what's going on within this Oklahoma program. We'll continue to monitor what Oklahoma is doing in spring practice. Obviously, watch the spring game, break down the spring game. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate all the Oklahoma fans for showing all the love that you guys do, and we'll talk to y'all later.